Yes, breathing is good. All right, let us continue with Acts 12:1 in our study as we read together the beginning, and we could read it together, please. Now at that time, Herod the king seized some from Messiah's community to do them harm. Now, we are almost always, using the TLV translation, the Tree of Life version. That scripture reads, now at that time, Herod the king seized some from the church to do them harm, in almost every other translation that's out there. So, as we say all the time, when we say things that are messianic in nature, or we say things that are in Hebrew or whatever, we try to make sure that everybody's on the same page, understands. I guess now is as good a time as any to remind everyone that these studies are not done from a Christian point of view, but from a first century, Second Temple, in that time period, Jewish point of view, which is not normally what people who are listening to this type of a teaching will hear. So it may seem a little strange, but it certainly opens up to many people understandings that they never had before, which is beneficial. So with that said, how many Herods were there? Excuse me a second. How many Herods were there? Here's the exact answer. A lot. And it's hard to keep them straight. You know, King Herod the Great, Herod, the first. So we're talking about in this verse, now at that time, Herod the king, okay? This particular Herod was Herod Agrippa the first. Okay, so that's who we're dealing with. He was the grandson of Herod the Great, who was the Herod in charge of everything at the time of the birth of Yeshua. So we're trying to put this into time frame, understanding, perspective. And Herod was a really bad boy, and he was crazy because he had 10 wives. Boys, can you imagine having 10 wives? Lord, as much as we love you, one's enough, sweetheart. Now, to show you how crazy, it was said, there's a saying during the time of Herod, that it was safer to be a pig than to be one of his own sons. That's a strange thing, historically, to know that. Why would it be safer to be a pig than one of his own children? Oh, that's right. He killed a lot of them. One of his wives, Miriam or Mary, had a son, Aristobulus, that was murdered by Herod the Great, as was Miriam. But before Aristobulus was murdered, he had this son, Herod Agrippa the first. Now, it's not important that you remember all this, because I don't remember all this. That's why I'm reading it. That's why it's not important. You can read it anytime you want. It'll keep you on track. Now, this son, through his grandmother's family line, just so you understand, and this will help answer some questions about some of the craziness of Judaism, was a descendant of the Maccabees. Okay? Not everybody knew that. Which made him, get these words, so-called Jewish. So this Agrippa the first, through his grandmother, through the Maccabees, was so-called Jewish. He was known by everyone far and wide to be one that kept the Jewish customs and was respected by the Jews. So why am I calling Agrippa a so-called Jew? He was considered to be a Jew, although genealogically, which is how you're supposed to be a Jew, okay? Although genealogically, he was just as his grandfather Herod the Great was. He was of, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Idumean, I believe is right, and the Nabataean roots. Well, those two people were both descended from the line of Esau. The plot thickens. Herod the Great's mother was Nabataean, and they came from Ishmael. So we have the plot thickened even more. So while Herod the Great was a Semite, there was no Hebrew, or say it another way, therefore no Jewish blood in him. The same then went for his grandson, Herod Agrippa I. However, the fiction of his Jewishness was useful. Try to relate first century, Second Temple time, and today. The fiction of his Jewishness was useful because the Jewish people convinced themselves that they now had a Jewish king. Why? Because he followed Judaism. What does that mean? He celebrated the biblical feasts. Anybody here not Jewish that celebrates the biblical feasts? Bunch of you. He sacrificed at the altar at the appropriate times. He respected the priesthood, the sanctity of the temple. Agrippa was popular with the Jewish people, and all in all, he was thought to be a good and decent king. Everybody get it? So this is a good time, as any, I guess, to say that the Jews mocked Herod the Great. That's daddy now. It's grandpop, you understand what I'm talking about. They mocked Herod the Great for his claim of Jewishness, yet they accepted Agrippa's because he seemed to genuinely follow Judaism. It's interesting that to this day, adhering to the religion of Judaism is the primary test for determining whether a person is a Jew or not. Ethnicity is often secondary. Interesting. Any of you who are Jewish find that to be true? We're Jewish, and yet because we believe in Yeshua, something's wrong with this picture. It's called We're Crazy. And yet we follow all the biblical feasts, and we are actually more Jewish than most of our relatives, almost all of our relatives, 99.9% of our relatives. So we sort of, as time goes on, become accepted as still Jewish, though many of our relatives wouldn't speak to us, or worse, for a long time. Can we relate to that? I know certainly Jackie and I can relate to that. Even Josephus. Josephus, Rome employed him. He's a Jewish guy. They employed him to write the biggest, fattest book in the world. Anybody ever see the book, the Josephus book? It's like, seriously, this is one big book, man. They employed him because he was a scholar, because he was Jewish, and because he was reporting on not just the Jews, but the Jews in particular, in many ways. And he described him, Agrippa the First, as Jewish. Interesting. Yet he knew the difference. He was regarded as a mild king and not rash until this happened. Let's read it together in Acts 12:2. He, Herod Agrippa, had Jacob, where we know him as James, John's brother, put to death with the sword. Whoa, wait a second. So this is meek and mild-mannered, Agrippa the First, and then bang, all of a sudden he does this. Well, let me help you to identify everyone here. Jacob is James's Hebrew name, and James and John were the ones in the Bible that you've recognized or heard called the sons of thunder. Okay? They're the ones who requested to sit one on the right and one on the left hand of Yeshua when he was in his kingdom. They were the ones with guts. Everybody wanted to do it. They just said it. Right? And when Herod Agrippa saw this death pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to then go after Peter. Why would he go after Peter? Well, first of all, let's read that in Acts 12:3 together. Seeing it pleased the Judean leaders, he proceeded to capture Peter as well. This was during the days of Matzah, or the days of unleavened bread, or Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're going to talk about this. So here's the conundrum. Don't you love that word? Conundrum. Here's the conundrum. Why did Agrippa go after the Jewish believers so violently that he beheaded James or Jacob? Why did he go and behead Jacob, the brother of John? And more, why were the Judeans so happy that he did it? Well, in the scripture, we're not told. It does not tell us why. However, Bible commentators usually say it was because of the way, that was the name of the believing people back then, the way's belief in Yeshua as the Messiah that he did it, and the Jews liked it. And kings like it when they're liked. Yet, he didn't go after the lay people. He went after the leadership. The movement then, as is true somewhat now, of Yeshua's followers had grown large enough that it now included Jews of many ilks. Crazy Jews. Let me tell you, when we first got started in Messianic Judaism, we used to go like, are we in a hospital ward? Is everybody crazy? You know? Right? It was like, wow, there was all kinds of strange things going on. So during the time, the beginnings included people of all kinds. Zealots. What are zealots? They're not people that sit around and do nothing. They're people that are reactionary. They're militant. They stir up trouble. If they believe in something, whether they think it through or not, whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter. They're after it, and it's a bull in a china shop. Okay? Well, Peter was known as an outspoken leader. So who better to go after than Peter? He was a natural target. And we all know that kings don't tolerate civil disturbances in their province. So I want you to notice in verse 3 that it says that this was during the Feast of Unleavened Bread that Agrippa arrested Peter. And then in verse 4, we're told that the king planned on dealing with Peter after Passover, which is a time that, again, I can make a point. You know, I deal with this with Jackie during the week, you know, where I'm putting these messages together, and some of them, like this one, can be really dry. It's like, okay, let's read it, and like, oh, that's exciting. Everybody's going to be asleep by the time I'm done, you know? But then let's learn a little bit. How does it relate to now? You know, does it relate to now? And is this the source of where it started? You understand what I'm saying? So hopefully this is a little bit more interesting for everyone who's not sleeping right now. By this time in history, the terms unleavened bread or matzah and Passover had become interchangeable. Is that true today amongst the Jewish people? Absolutely. In fact, most Jewish people, if you said, yeah, we're celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread. What? You know? Or Passover is only one day long. Yeah, is that what those Messianic Jews told you? We all know it's a week long, right? Because that's what we grew up. Well, a Jew could say that it was during the Passover season or during the season of unleavened bread, and it meant the same thing back then. The Jews were well aware that Passover and unleavened bread were two entirely different God-ordained biblical feasts. The Jews today are not aware of that en masse. It doesn't mean the Orthodox are not, but en masse, most have no clue about that. However, since, remember, back then, Passover was a one-day feast, and the week-long festival of unleavened bread began the day after Passover. Then in common everyday speech, they were spoken of as one combined event. So some would call the entire festival period Passover, others would call it unleavened bread, and even switch back and forth within the same conversation back then. In biblical reality, Jews were not required to come to the temple on Passover. Some of you know that. They were required to come on unleavened bread, which is not the same as Passover. The reality is, if someone was going to be in Jerusalem for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and since the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread was a Sabbath day that prohibited travel, then the only solution was to arrive early, which meant since the day before the first day of the Feast of let's say that again. Since the day of the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread was Passover, that any traveling had to be completed before Passover, which meant if you were coming to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you inadvertently had to be there for Passover anyway because of the Sabbath. And Agrippa did not want there to be a big hullabaloo during this time when all these crazy people were showing up in Jerusalem. He didn't want to have an execution during those 8 holy days. So he arrested Peter prior to the Passover, and then when both feasts were completed, he planned on dealing with him then. So, not such a dumb king, right? Right? Acts 12:4 together. After seizing him, he put him in prison, handing him over to 4 squads. Now, those squads, anybody ever see this word? Quaternion? That's 4 soldiers. Okay? Handing him over to 4 squads with 4 soldiers each to guard him. He was intending to bring him before the people after Passover. So again, this quaternion was actually 4 soldiers. As a rule, a prisoner, I'm the prisoner up here, had my right hand chained to the guard on my right, which would be his left hand. And that's how securely they were going to take care of that prisoner, but not with Peter. Peter had his left hand also chained to a guard on that guard's right hand. Why? They wanted to make sure he did not get loose. They wanted to make sure he was extra secure. These soldiers, to know that they stayed awake, were there in 3-hour shifts. That's not a long shift. Around the clock. So there was 16 soldiers altogether watching Peter in those 3-hour shifts. Everybody understand? And now, Dr. Clayton back there, if I could ask you to lead the group and the people on the internet so that they can hear you. We're going to read Acts 12:5 through 11 while I get a little bit of extra breath.
So Peter was kept in prison, but prayer for him was about to bring him out. Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, while guards before the gate were keeping watch over the prison. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He poked Peter on the side and woke him up, saying, "Get up, quick!" And the chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, "Get dressed and put on your sandals." And he did so. Then he tells him, "Put on your cloak and follow me." Peter went out and kept following him. He didn't know that what was happening with the angel but thought he was seeing a vision. After they passed the first guard and a second, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them by itself. They went out and walked along a narrow street. Suddenly, the angel left them. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for real that the Lord has sent his angel and delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Judean people were expecting."
So Peter was kept in prison. Thank you, Clayton. He was kept in prison, but prayer was going on. Prayer of faith, right? Was going on without ceasing. And as a result, before Herod had him brought out, the angel of the Lord came, a light shines, he pokes Peter in the side, tells him, "Get up, quickly, get up, get dressed, put on your sandals, put on your cloak, and follow me." And Peter, like he did when he jumped out of the boat, decided, "Yeah, let's do this." So he followed him. And what do you think he's thinking? Well, in the hearings today and yesterday, people were saying, "How do you know what he was thinking?" Well, it tells us in the scripture what he was thinking. Can it be real? These chains have fallen off. I'm walking past these guards. The iron gate unlocks itself and opens up. This can't be real. It's just a dream. It's a vision. It's not really happening. That's what he's thinking. You know how we know that's what he's thinking? Because finally, when the angel left and Peter was standing on the street, he says, "Hey, it wasn't a dream." This is the great Peter. When you think about it, he's thinking, "This is nuts. They must have put something in my V8 today," you know? And he realized that God had delivered him from the hand of Herod. So let's close tonight with this. Clayton, if I could ask you to read Acts 12:12 through 16, please, together with him.
When he realized this, he went to the house of Miriam, the mother of John, also called Mark. where many were assembled together and praying. When he knocked on the door of the entrance gate, a maid named Rhonda came to answer. Although she recognized Peter's voice, out of joy she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You're crazy." But she kept insisting it was so. But they were saying, "It is his angel." But Peter kept on knocking. When they opened the gate, they saw him and were amazed.
Let's go back to verse 5. We won't put it on the screen, where it says, prayer for him, and we all agreed it was a prayer of faith. Prayer for him was going forth fervently to God by the Messianic community, by the church, by the people that were there. So we now see Peter come to the house where the prayer meeting is going on. Yep. This is Miriam's house, the house of Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark. It's thought that this was pretty much the headquarters for believers in Jerusalem, is where they showed up. In fact, it's thought by some that the upper room was actually in the house of Miriam, the mother of Mark. And it's Peter's knocking, right? So they could hear, knocking on the door of the gate. Rhoda, this poor young lady, who knows his voice clearly, didn't open the gate with gladness. Dingbat. But she runs in and tells them all that Peter is standing at the gate. And they're all inside praying. Still. Oh, God, help Peter. Oh, Lord, deliver Peter. And Rhoda comes running in. Peter's at the door. And they tell her, "You're crazy." Such men of faith. When you're feeling like crap because your faith isn't where it belongs, go read a little bit of this stuff and remember how I explained it. You know, think about it. We do or we don't truly believe. I'm going to tell you something. The men's and women's study that I told you about is going to rock your boat a little bit in this area. Yes? That's why I said we all need to come. You or I surely can't accuse this group of praying the prayer of faith. Because when they're told that God had answered the prayer, Peter's at the door and they didn't believe it, they accuse this girl of being crazy. Then they say, it must be an angel. It must be his spirit. Spirit's knocking on the door. Surely it's not Peter. Think about it. So Peter just kept on knocking. And finally they opened the door. Can you imagine? Finally they opened the door. I'm sure these doors are not like Home Depot doors with windows everywhere, you know what I mean? This is probably a solid oak door with gargoyles or something on it, you know what I mean? Anyway, and they were, get this word, astonished. They were astonished. Should they have been astonished? Yes. No. They were praying for this to happen. Did they really believe? Obviously not. Should they have been astonished? No. But they were astonished. And they called her stupid. Now who's stupid? Crazy. Sorry, not stupid. And Peter, in his wisdom, said or declared how the Lord had brought him out of prison. As a matter of fact, like he believed it all along.